Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The J-Reels Podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. The weather outside is frightful. The sports world is so delightful. If you don't think it's so, let it show, let it show, let it show. Yes, by yours truly. All right. Corniness aside, despite a bit of a deep freeze in my neck of the woods, I'll provide some warm thoughts and some hot takes on all that's happening in the wonderful landscape of sports, as this is the J-Reels Podcast with your host, J-Reels. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And for all my guys out there, and maybe a few women, who knows, gotta include them as well. The next 5 days could test your relationships, especially if you're involved, whether boyfriend, girlfriend, whether fiance, engaged, or even married for that case, because over the next 5 days, and really 5 evenings especially, football is going to permeate the households of America and beyond with, get ready for this, count them. You're going to have between tonight at around 8 p.m. Eastern till Monday night, 11:30, you are going to have 8 football games that are going to take place. And if that's not going to cause a rift or some sort of division in the household, I don't know what will, because if there's one sport that's going to certainly take the life out of, maybe even the soul out of a relationship, it could be football. And thankfully, it's just once a week. But now as we get to the meat and potatoes, we get to the nitty gritty, we get to the bulk of a football season that is about to conclude in college. We have a semifinal that's going to start off tonight, and I'm going to get to the college later on. I need to start off with the NFL because you have a ton of storylines, a ton of different angles that we could start off this segment. And before we even get to that, I want to start off by saying that the wild card round here, ever since the 2021 season, when the NFL expanded their playoff to 7 teams in each conference, to where you have the Super Wild Card Weekend. And let's be honest, it's been anything but that since the advent of it back in 2021, because this is a round that in the past, you've had some exciting games, you've had some interesting games. I'm not going to go through the litany of games prior to 2021, but since that time, you have had an abomination. You have not had a lot of great games in this round. We could even just look back to last year. Last year at this time, you had a scenario where you had the Steelers, which obviously are back here front and center in a wild card round. They lost in Buffalo with Mason Rudolph as quarterback. You had the Eagles go down to Tampa. Remember their free fall at the end of the year, and they got blasted on a Monday night. And then when you take a look at a lot of the other games that took place in this opening round, where you have the 2 games on Saturday, you have the 3 games on Sunday, and then the 1 Monday night. That's, of course, the NFL trying to spread themselves thin and not have the 3 games on Saturday and Sunday, which would have been perfect if you ask me. But even back last year where Cleveland and the Houston Texans, a lot of people thought that Cleveland was going in hot, and then Joe Flacco threw 2 pick sixes and the Texans went going away, so that just pretty much flushed that scenario out down the toilet. And then you had the Kansas City Chiefs on that Saturday night. Chiefs hosting in a wild card round. No, they did not have the bye, if you recall, but for Kansas City in that frostbitten game in Arrowhead, which was streamed on Peacock, and having, 23 million people watch that, where if it was on network TV, it probably would have gotten a lot more. But still, the Dolphins were no match for the Chiefs there on that Saturday night game. And listen, we could go through not only just last year's, I just gave you 4 games off the bat. I didn't even talk about those middle games where you had just, I don't want to say snooze fest, but nothing that was compelling, nothing that was riveting, that we would love to see come playoff time. And now here it is, the wild card round, which you have 4 of the 6 games this weekend are rematches, whether it's Pittsburgh, Baltimore, as we know they're division foes, so they're going to play twice a year. Whether it's Washington, Tampa, where they played week 1, Green Bay and Philly, which also played in week 1, this time in Brazil. And then you have the Monday night matchup with Minnesota and the Rams that had a Thursday night game, which came down to that final drive. Although the face mask was not called, but because it was deep in Ram territory, it would have been a long shot for the Vikings to win that game. One of only 3 losses by the Vikings all year. And the other 2 games, you have Denver and the Buffalo Bills going to Orchard Park there Sunday. And then the other matchup is the one that's going to open up the playoffs, which is the Chargers and Texans. So before we even get into all the games, before we get into all the matchups, we have to go through my storylines. And you can rank them any which way you want. I'm going to rank them accordingly as to how I see it. And the first one, front and center, has to be Lamar Jackson. And also John Harbaugh. He's a 1A because Harbaugh in big spots, I do not trust. And I don't want to hear about people coming out saying, well, wait a minute, how could you underestimate what John Harbaugh has done as coach of the Ravens, all of the AFC North division champions? Of course, him winning a Super Bowl way back when. What was it now, 13 years ago, on top of the success that he's had as a head coach in this league. Well, you know what? I could throw out the person that he's going to stare in the other sideline in a one Mike Tomlin to also have that same pedigree, not have a losing season, him winning a Super Bowl and getting to another one. But because it's been a long time between drinks, as far as victories go, raising that Lombardi trophy to the air, we could talk about how overrated John Harbaugh has been over the last few years. We could also maybe say the same for Tomlin. And he's another one that's going to be on this list, and I'm going to get to him in a minute. But for Lamar, mainly him, on the verge of possibly winning back-to-back MVPs and maybe a 3rd overall in the 8th year of his career. And even though I think Josh Allen is going to get the MVP when it's all said and done, but Lamar now has to show and prove. And not just here in this round. Because he could go out and beat the Steelers and get the piano off his back. And even though he beat him a few weeks ago in Baltimore right before Christmas, and people could say that the Steelers are his kryptonite, and okay, you could definitely say that. But Lamar has to deliver. Lamar has to get back to a championship game and put himself in a position to get to a Super Bowl. Now, if he gets to a championship game, which in all likelihood will be Kansas City, if he goes out and they lose, let's say 35-31, but he is 24 for 33, 275 yards, 3 touchdowns, maybe he throws that timely and costly interception. But if he does put up numbers like that, you cannot kill him as far as his performance goes in the postseason. And just like last year where he did not perform well in the championship game against Kansas City, and then other games in big spots, whether it was up in Buffalo, there in, I believe, 3 years ago, maybe even 4 at this point, or even that opening round game against Tennessee where he won his first MVP, how he just literally crapped the bed. Now it's time for him to play like the MVP in the postseason. It's time for him to raise his game. And even though I'm sure they're going to do well against Pittsburgh here, considering that they just beat them a few weeks ago and put up 34 points in the process, granted that 7 of those were from a pick 6, but still, Lamar has to show and prove that he could play this regular season MVP level, translate that to the postseason. So he's number 1. The second storyline that I have is Josh Allen. And even that coach too, Sean McDermott, because he's had his boneheaded moments, but Josh Allen, who is similar to Lamar in this regard, he has not won the big game yet. And of course, that big game would be the last game of the year, this time in New Orleans in February. But the thing is with Josh Allen, he has performed in these big games. It's either his special teams has let him down or the defense has let him down. In particular, that shootout a couple of years back in the divisional round where he got the go-ahead touchdown late and then the special teams just fell apart. Partly the defense too, because 2 plays, 13 seconds later, Harrison Butker kicked that game-tying field goal to push the game to overtime, and then the defense failed him on that opening drive where Tyreek Hill got the touchdown to ice the game, and that's where the rules were changed because of overtime, more so in the playoffs, but even in the regular season too, where 2 teams can get the ball in overtime. And because of that, Josh Allen and the Bills weren't able to advance to a conference championship. But for Josh Allen, likely MVP this year, and although he has performed in big games, although he hasn't delivered that signature win, but now is his time. This Buffalo Bill team has been knocking on the door. And granted, they haven't been to a conference championship going back 4 years where they lost in Arrowhead, where they had a 9-0 lead early before the Kansas City Chiefs were able to take off and beat them. Because think about it, the last few years for Josh Allen, he has lost in the divisional playoff, whether it was to the Bengals a couple years ago, whether it was last year to Kansas City as we saw, whether it was the aforementioned game, 42-36, where lost in Arrowhead. That was the year after they lost in the conference championship game to Kansas City. So 3 years in a row, it has been second round and out. Allen has to get to a conference championship again. Now, what does that mean, the big picture for Lamar Jackson? Right, you have to get to the dance. That is the objective. That is the goal, of course. But at least Lamar Jackson's got to a conference championship last year. Josh Allen hasn't, going on 4 years. So I don't want to hear how, the Buffalo Bills, they had the 2 home games. You would think if they beat the Broncos and then they're going to have to host another game the week after, which would be against Lamar Jackson if the chips fall where they may. But both of these guys, these quarterbacks who are MVPs in their own right, they have to get to a conference championship game and even beyond that. Because we've seen Patrick Mahomes get to Super Bowl after Super Bowl after Super Bowl, and I get it that he's the one guy that's standing in their way, a la Jordan many years ago against Charles Barkley or Patrick Ewing. We could go down the list of players, but this is their time. The Chiefs, despite their best record in the sport, they're a team that can be picked off. They've shown a lot of warts and they've shown a lot of valleys, despite the fact that they have a tremendous amount of peaks because of the DNA in that quarterback, number 15 in red and gold, and of course the head coach. But now for Josh Allen, it is his time to shine and rise to that level to where not only he'll be able to match Patrick Mahomes, but even surpass him. So that's my second storyline. The third one, and I got to throw it out there, is Mike Tomlin. Now, I understand the last couple of times that he's been in the postseason, in 21, as I mentioned, and even last year against Buffalo, they've been 7 seeds. And not that you expect to go far being a 7 seed by any stretch of the imagination, but for Tomlin, he's going to have to, in this game, against an opponent that he knows very well, if he wins the game, there are no more victories. So if they get blown out the following week, in all likelihood, that would be in Kansas City. But for Tomlin, he has to get the piano off of his back. He has not won a playoff game since that Chief game where Chris Boswell kicked 6 field goals and they won 18-16 before losing to New England in the AFC Championship game that year. So with all the losses that have happened in between, whether it was Jacksonville the year after where they came in 21-0, 28-7 at the half, and they lost 45-42, or losing to the Browns in the pandemic year in an empty building to where they were down 28-0 at the end of the first quarter. And they had to scratch and claw the way back before losing 48-37. And then the aforementioned 2 games at 21 and 23. Tomlin has to win a playoff game here. And despite the fact that they're going in wounded, loses a 4 straight. They started the year 8-2 and 10-3, and now it looks like they're going to wither away into the Baltimore night if they don't turn it around. And for Tomlin, this is a very important game. Now, does this mean his job? Absolutely not, because we know that the coaching turnover in Pittsburgh only happens every 18 years. And maybe it is his time, despite the fact that he did sign a 3-year extension after last year. But unless the Steelers are a complete no-show in this game, this is going to fall squarely on Tomlin, because he could have all of the regular season success. He could have all the seasons that he's been 500 or best. And as we know, with a 17-game unbalanced season, chances are you can't fall 8-8 anymore. You're either going to be 9-8 above, and that's it. Because if you're 8-9, you're under 500. He could have all those successful seasons that he wants. And yes, it may be nice to see as a Steeler fan, proud, yours truly. But when does it end? So he's going to have to steal one of these games, and he's going to have to do so Saturday night, because if not, it's going to be another long off season. It's going to be another empty feeling in January, and Tomlin, the bullseye is squarely going to be on him to perform well and to try to pull a rabbit out of a hat just in order for them to get to the next round and maybe be sacrificial lambs to the 2-time Super Bowl champion Chiefs. So that is my third storyline. I still have a couple others, people, before I continue. The Minnesota Vikings. The only reason why I bring them up is because for the great regular season that they had, and although they had a bad game there Sunday night against the Lions, but for a team that was 14-3 and now have to go on the road to a place where they lost earlier this year in LA, and the Rams with that coach, Sean McVay, and their quarterback, and their resources, this could be a one-and-done scenario, which, if you're a Viking fan, I don't want to hear it. To my guy, Headstyle in Minneapolis, and to my longtime friend, Kev, who's a Viking fan, tried and true, going back to the 70s. This would be a bitter pill to swallow if you do not come away with a victory. Now, even if you go the following week, in all likelihood, back to Detroit for a third go-around, and you'll take your chances there. But if you don't get past this round, and this isn't to knock the Ram fan and what they've been able to do, because remember, they were 1-4 to start the year, and here they are, division winners and hosting a playoff game. But there is a disparity there between the Rams and Vikings record-wise. Rams are 9-8. Vikings are 14-3. And we've seen this in the postseason where teams that have had that advantage, and the first one that comes to mind, 12-4 Steelers in 2011 to the 8-8 Broncos, and Tim Tebow to Demaryius Thomas, may he rest in peace. First play out of the gate in overtime for the Broncos to win against the Steelers. That was a scenario where you had a team that had a 4-game separation against the opposition and end up losing. And here's a scenario where you have a 5-game separation, and let's see what happens. But the Vikings, not to say that this would substantiate their year if they were to win this game and move on and let's say lose to Detroit, but if he had a big year like they have and you're going to not win in a wild card round, I don't want to hear it. That, to me, is just a bitter way to end your season, and especially having a chance to get the 1 seed and to have a bye and not even play in this round, to compound that with a loss in LA again to the Rams. I'm sorry. That would be a tough one to swallow if I'm a Viking fan. And then the last couple of storylines. The health of Jalen Hurts. Now, based on what I've read here over the last couple of days, he's looked sharp in practice, but we all know practice doesn't mean anything. So chances are it looks like he's going to start there Sunday against Green Bay. And for the Eagles, who also had a big year in their own right, and with a MVP candidate in Saquon Barkley, although he's not going to get it, rushing for 2,000 yards, etc. How I look at it is, Jalen Hurts, we understand everybody's one play away from being done for a season, or even for a career for that matter, because of the violent nature of the NFL. But all I'll say is this. Hurts, he's going to have to be healthy in order for the Eagles to get back to a Super Bowl, because whether it's Kenny Pickett or their third-string quarterback, the last thing the Eagle fan wants to see is that. So let's see how he's going to perform here in this opening round game against Green Bay. So that's another storyline heading in. And then Jaden Daniels, his first playoff game. The Commanders back in the playoffs after a long absence. Now, I understand they made it a few years ago in the pandemic year when they were, 7-8-1 in a very brutal NFC East, if you recall. But for the rookie quarterback to get his first taste of the playoffs and having to go back to Tampa, where he started his NFL career, I'm sure he'd like to get out of Tampa with a victory and continue his march into the NFC playoffs after this wild card round. So, can he continue to play on this high level, considering that he is still a rookie? He has 17 games under his belt. And for him to now raise his game even higher against a Buccaneer team that's going to be game with Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, Bucky Irving, etc. Now, I don't trust the coach in Todd Bowles, but could be an interesting matchup for the young quarterback to go up against a Buccaneer team that has seasoned, that does have a few players, just a smattering, left over from the Super Bowl team of 3 years ago with Tom Brady. But for Daniels, let's see how he's going to be on this stage after what will likely be a Rookie of the Year nod for the first-year quarterback. So let's jump right into it, people. The matchups, and I'll go game by game throughout the course of the schedule over the weekend. The Chargers going to Houston against the Texans. Chargers played well this year under Jim Harbaugh in his first year. Justin Herbert also a very good quarterback in his own right. Do not have a lot of pieces there offensively, and he also brought in Ezekiel Elliott just as insurance, as a guy who could pass block, especially pick up blitzes, and especially with that Texan team who has a lot of pass rushers on that team, Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson Jr. So I'm sure they brought him in as a reinforcement to try to thwart that pass rush by the Texans. But with the Texans fumbling, bumbling, stumbling here over the second half of the season. And of course, it's easy to say that the Chargers, not to say they're going in hot, but Chargers did win those final 2 games in Foxborough, and then they beat the Vegas Raiders along the way. So for the Chargers, let's see. A lot of people think that it could be a dark horse here in the AFC as a 5 seed. They got to go through the road, of course, as we know. Excuse me, but how I look at it is that I can see the Texans, similar to last year where a lot of people picked Cleveland to win in that wild card round, considering how hot they were going into the playoffs. And what happened? C.J. Stroud had a big game. The defense showed up. And the next thing you know, Houston was on a plane going to Baltimore for a divisional playoff game. Could I see that happen this go around now? I don't know. I don't know if the Texans are going to have it in them, considering that they do have the game in their building. And even though the Chargers, they're a little Jekyll and Hyde in their own right. Watch Justin Herbert throw a couple of interceptions. Watch them get into a situation where they may play a little bit tight. And I hate to say it, despite the fact that it is a new culture, new coach, but the Chargers are the Chargers. They've had these meltdowns in years past. And I get it, you can't just automatically say, oh, what happened 2 years ago, 5, 10, 20 years ago? Doesn't matter for right this very moment. I get that, but when you're an organization that has not been able to get over the hump and have their own baggage, maybe not with this coach, but with this quarterback. Justin Herbert had a 27-0 lead at halftime in Jacksonville, and how did that turn out? So just keep that in mind in this game. I'd be hard-pressed to pick the Texans, although I can see the Texans winning, but I'm going to say the Chargers in a close game. I think the Chargers and the head coach, and I like DeMeco Ryans and C.J. Stroud, but I think they're going to find a way, and their defense is also pretty good in their own right. I'm going to say Chargers 23, Texans 20. The night game, which is going to be on Amazon Prime, of course, gotta feed all these mouths, NFL. Their first playoff game since 2014, where the Ravens beat the Steelers 30-17. And this is the 5th time they're going to face in the postseason, 2nd time in Baltimore. Actually, this is the first time they're going to be playing in Baltimore because the other 4 times were in Pittsburgh, including an AFC Championship game in 2008, which was one of the hardest hitting games I've ever seen. The divisional round in 2010, that was the year that the Steelers went to a Super Bowl, last time they were ever in a Super Bowl. The aforementioned wild card game where they lost, and then that first game was a divisional playoff game in 2001, the year after the Ravens won their Super Bowl, the first one that is. And how I look at this game, and I'm being objective here, people, as a diehard Steeler fan, if the Steelers do not play similar, especially defensively, similar to the first 13 games of the year, they're not going to win this game. They have to get turnovers. They have to be disruptive. They have to not only just be physical, which is a given in any Steeler-Raven game, but they're going to have to be larcenous here on the defensive side. If it's even, let's say if it's a game which is clean, no turnovers, can they win the game? I think they can, but I don't think they will. And obviously, if the turnover advantage is to Baltimore, forget about it. That's going to be a given. So the Steelers are going to have to not only get some turnovers, but they're going to have to capitalize. They're going to have to convert those to 6s and not 3s. So if I'm Cam Hayward, TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, going down the line, they're going to have to be very opportunistic. They're going to have to be even just flying to the ball, unlike they haven't been over the last few weeks. And this could be a game that the defensive coordinator, Terrell Austin, could be walking the plank, and they're going to have to save his job. Because if they lose a game similar to the one that they won a few weeks ago down in Baltimore, which was 34-17, and granted that it was a little bit more cosmetic because of that pick 6 there, Russell Wilson, if you watched. But their defense is going to have to rise here. And if they lose a close game 20-17, as a Steelers fan, you're not going to be able to live with it because it is the Ravens. But at least if they had a shot in the fourth quarter to take a lead or had a chance to even win the game, and for whatever the reason they fall by the wayside, again, it's going to stick to your ribs, but at least they win the game. If it's going to be a scenario where the Ravens jump out in front and then the Steelers have to play catch-up, and maybe similar to the game down in Baltimore where after Minkah Fitzpatrick took that interception at 24-17 deep in Steeler territory and you had a shot to say, all right, let's see if they can march down the field, tie the game, and then it's anybody's game at that point. But as we all know, 2 plays later, the game was over because of that pick 6 by Marlon Humphrey. So the Steeler defense, it's going to be all about them. And their offense has been putrid, evidenced by the game against the Bengals the other night where they had, 179 yards of offense and Russell Wilson couldn't get going. And I get it, there were a bunch of drops in the process. But the only way the Steelers are going to win this game is they get turnovers. And you can't predict those. And that's how I look at it. Because if it's going to be even across the board, the Ravens have better players. They have the better quarterback. They have the better running back. They have the better wideouts. You name it. Tight end. Go on down the line. And defensively, that team can be picked off, the Ravens. But are the Steelers going to raise their game that much more to the point where Russell Wilson's going to have almost like that breakout game that he had against Cincinnati in Cincinnati, where he threw for over 400 yards and had by far one of his best days in a uniform, NFL uniform, I might add, in several years. How I look at this, Ravens 27, Steelers 16. I wish it could be different. Can the Steelers win this game? Of course they can. But the only way they will, one more time, turnovers. Then on Sunday, Denver-Buffalo. I get it that the Denver defense is going to be opportunistic, but similar to what I said earlier about Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix is now going to be front and center here. This is a whole different animal. This is a whole different beast. And Buffalo, I know that they're salivating. They know that for them, and I would think this is boom or bust for the Bills. Now, they're going to be able to host 2 home games, which is a big boon for them, but they've been down this road before, losing twice in the divisional round, as I talked about. But for this first round, and who knows what the weather's going to be like, it's been cold in the Northeast, and this is the 5 boroughs. If you go about 7-8 hours north of here, right off of the lake, who knows if you're going to have snow. I'm sure the temps are going to be probably somewhere in the teens, and not that it's going to factor in the Broncos because they play in a mile high and they play in cold weather as it is. But with a rookie quarterback having to go up against a team that and a city that has just been waiting for this moment, I think this is going to be a tall order. And Denver's defense, they're going to have to win this game, similar to what the Steelers are going to have to do. They're going to have to be very opportunistic. They're going to have to try to force turnovers, try to get a pick six that they can from maybe the likely defensive player of the year, and one Patrick Surtain, the corner of the Broncos. But again, Buffalo has not had a problem in this round in years past, especially in their building, and I can't see it changing here. Buffalo 26, Denver 14. And that is the AFC 1, 2, 3 in a row, where the NFC will get the back half of the wild card weekend. Green Bay, Philadelphia. Now the Packers are going to have a huge loss there. No Christian Watson, tore his ACL, done for the year. They do have Josh Jacobs, the running back, and Romeo Doubs, the other receiver, but that is a big piece. And I'm not trying to make Christian Watson out to be Robert Brooks. Look him up, NFL fans. And not to say Robert Brooks was a Hall of Fame wide receiver, but he was a guy that was certainly a cog in the wheel and in the machine of the Packer offense dating back to the 90s. But for Watson, he's a guy that certainly brought another dimension. Or I don't say another dimension, too strong. Certainly was the go-to guy on that wideout position. And now that you don't have that, you're going to have to really look long and hard to find another playmaker. And this is where the ground game is going to be critical in order for Jordan Love to have any success in the passing game come Sunday. And we talked about the health of Jalen Hurts as far as him being 100% ready to go for this game. But for the Packers, they haven't beaten the big team all year. And why would this change now? They lost to the Eagles week 1, as we know. And the other losses that they have on their ledger, besides the Bears there in the final game of the year, they lost twice to Minnesota and twice to the Lions. Why would this change? I can't see it. And they know they don't have Jair Alexander, who's been out since November. But that's also a very big loss there in their secondary. I think the Eagles, with everything leading up into this game, and especially after the bad taste they try to get out of their mouths from last year's just collapse and wild card effort against the Buccaneers in that opening game down in Tampa, I see this Philadelphia 28, Green Bay 19. And as far as the nightcap, where I know not a sexy matchup for NBC, but when you have to spread the wealth here, you just can't automatically give them Green Bay, Philadelphia, or even let's say Pittsburgh, Baltimore for that matter. They're going to get a less crappy game because you got to give Amazon Prime a good game, and you're giving them Baltimore and Pittsburgh. Fox only has one game this week, so you know they're going to snatch the Green Bay, Philadelphia game. CBS also, I believe, has the one game because you have ESPN as the first game there on Saturday, Amazon Prime Sunday, CBS the first game, Fox the second game, NBC, and I believe you have ESPN again on Monday night. So where does that leave you? Washington, Tampa, the Sunday night game. And Jaden Daniels, I don't know if this is going to be too big for his britches. I would think he's going to be cool, calm, and collective under the coach Dan Quinn, who does know his way around playoff games, making it to a Super Bowl, as we all know, member of the Falcons, and we all witnessed what transpired in that game against the Patriots. But I think Tampa, and they have a very good offense, and for Baker Mayfield, I'm sure this is a team that would look forward to going to Detroit quite possibly. And they have very good success there up in the Motor City. But one game at a time, I think for what they've done this year, and I understand they're not overly impressive, but Baker Mayfield does show you a lot of grit, a lot of toughness. Yeah, is he a top 10 quarterback? Not in the least. But is he a guy that will grit out a game, will tough out a game, even with the few peccadillos that he may have on his playoff resume or in his resume overall, being a former number 1 overall pick? All right, fine. But you know what? He is a good fit for that team, for that offense, and I think that they're going to prevail here against a young and up-and-coming Commander team. So for Tampa, I think they're going to put points on this Commander defense, and therefore I'm going to pick the Bucs 31-21 over Washington. And then the Monday night game, I understand everybody's picking the Rams here because of McVay, the quarterback. They beat him earlier this year. But I think Minnesota has a chip on his shoulder. I'm sure they're going to hear all the whispers of that Thursday night game in the middle of the year. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to think, even a couple of years ago, they were 13-4. They were in the wild card round where they hosted against the Giants, and we saw how that turned out. And for Kevin O'Connell, probably the coach of the year in the NFL, and with all of what they did this year, I'm sure they're going to be hearing that, oh, the Rams, they have the advantage. Oh, the Rams, they have a bit more of a pedigree than the Vikings do, and all the different scenarios going into this game. But Sam Darnold, he's another guy. And you could also put him on there maybe as a storyline on whether or not he's going to be able to bank on that regular season success to translate into the wild card round. And you know what? I think it will. I think it's going to be a tough game. I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings have the ball last down 23-20 and they punch it in the end zone. And that's my final score. Vikings 27, Rams 23. And this is a huge game for Darnold too in that regard because he is a free agent after this year. You wonder whether or not the Vikings are going to re-sign him. And it's a situation where he's got millions riding on just this game alone, whether or not he's going to be able to deliver the Vikings to the divisional playoff round. So keep that in mind as we move it along. That is your wild card weekend. Let's see how it unfolds. As I mentioned at the top, it certainly has not been a round to remember over the last 3 years. The divisional round is always the best weekend of football on the calendar, especially come playoff time. But for the wild card, certainly is a lot more to be desired. So you got that going on. And as far as coaches go, Antonio Pierce fired in Las Vegas. Is that a shock? Absolutely not. So let's see where the Raiders go. And I know a lot has been made about maybe Bill Belichick. Come on, he just got to North Carolina. And now all of a sudden, because of the influence of Tom Brady being a minority owner of the team, that right away they're just going to be able to pluck him out of Chapel Hill and then bring him to Sin City. I don't believe that in the least, so you can forget about it. And then the Cowboys denied the request by the Bears to interview Mike McCarthy as their head coach. And if that's going to be the case, then Jerry Jones just sign him right now. Why waste anybody's time? Why drag this out? Why have this be the soap opera that is Dallas ever since the day of Who Shot JR in the late 70s, early 80s? So Jerry, cut to the chase, just sign McCarthy for 3 years, give him 2 and maybe a team opt-out after that second year, and that's it. Wash your hands and call it, I don't want to say a career, but call it. That's it. Over and out. But that's just how Jerry works down there in Dallas. So we'll see what happens with these coaches and where it's going to go. Obviously, the Jets need a coach, and we can talk about all the other vacancies there in the NFL, but those will be filled as time goes on, and obviously we'll talk about that when we get to that point. All right, now I'm going to keep the helmet and shoulder pads on because college football has a semifinal round tonight and tomorrow. Tonight being Notre Dame-Penn State, tomorrow Ohio State and Texas. The storylines going into these games, the first and foremost, are the teams that are left standing are your 5 through 8 seeds. That's right, the top 4 who had byes are all gone, as we talked about there last week. So the 5 through 8 seeds stand. Which one will come out smelling like roses? Which one will advance to a national championship game? And therefore, you wonder whether or not this could be the last time we would see 5 through 8 seeds make it here to the semifinal round, because you would think there's going to be a lot of talk, if there hasn't already been with the committee and the NCAA, of reshaping the college playoff format to where it's not going to be the top 4 seeds automatically getting byes by winning their conference championship. I think it should just be whomever is ranked 1 through 12 will be the teams that will face off against one another. So if you have your top 4 teams in the country, whomever that may be, those will be the ones that have the byes, and they will have the first round bye, where the 5 through 12 will hash it out until you get to that second round. That's the way it should be. So for Boise State, Arizona State, they will not get an automatic bye heading into the postseason, because when you think about it, those 2 teams certainly do not belong in the top 4. Top 12, yes. Top 4, no. So this could be the last time we would see that. Just something to keep in mind, especially as we get into the offseason and the next college football year. Now, to me, the one storyline are the similarities between Notre Dame and Penn State. And these are 2 blue bloods, if you will. And for these schools, I'm sure there's going to be a huge turnout there. It's going to be in the Orange Bowl. As for Penn State and for everything that they've been carrying throughout the course of the year, not winning against big teams, and people could say, all right, well, look what they've done here. They played well against Oregon in a Big Ten championship, and they could see what they did to the likes of these teams along the way, whether it's Boise State in the last round. I'm not even going to include the opening round against SMU. Forget about that. But for Penn State, needing to win against a big opponent, and Notre Dame is that. So for James Franklin, who came out and said in his presser with Marcus Freeman, the coach of Notre Dame, right by his side, and let me see if I can pull up a quote. He said, talking about representing our schools, our conferences. And then he realized, well, our school and our conference. Because as we all know, Notre Dame is an independent and is not affiliated with any conference in the nation. So who knows if that's something Marcus Freeman and the Fighting Irish will keep as bulletin board material. I understand it's minor. It wasn't a shot at the team per se, more so the school and them being the independent that they are. But to me, it's about those 2 schools and what they've represented throughout the college football landscape and its history. And then on top of that, more of a 1A, and this should probably be number 1, is this Ohio State's championship to lose? Based on what we've seen here in these first 2 rounds, and based on what they did, especially to Oregon there in the Rose Bowl, more so that one than the first round game, because that one I won't even include. Yes, we saw what they did in the 8-9 matchup against Tennessee and how they obliterated them, but the Oregon game certainly made you raise your eyebrows, and now they would have to be the odds-on favorite to win the whole thing as an 8 seed, no less. But Ryan Day, can he even upstage what he did in the Rose Bowl here? So it's almost, what can you do for an encore if you're Ohio State, considering that you've been steamrolling through these first 2 rounds? And they're going to go up against a Texas team that has been playing from in front all year. Mind you, the 2 losses to Georgia, we can understand. But can Texas be that team to get themselves to a national championship, despite the fact that they're also a Jekyll and Hyde team? And for the Longhorns, who have had a steady year, not necessarily spectacular, despite their record, but they're going to have to play, I'm not going to say a perfect game, but they're going to have to play a near perfect game in order for them to get to a national championship. Because when you look at it, just in this playoff alone, Clemson, they actually had a shot. Now, to me, they had no shot to win the game because there was not a lot of drama, but they let the Tigers come back and Kate Klubnik, and there was a thought that maybe if they were to get a score, and off the top of my head, I can't recall, but Texas was able to answer and close out the game. But they had these lulls. It's not as if they played crisp in a full 60 minutes. And then all you got to do is look at the Arizona State game where they had a 24-8 lead with about 10 minutes to go, and they let them come all the way back to tie and actually could have lost the game if it wasn't for a 4th and 13 execution there by the Longhorns to extend the game at that time. So that's the one thing you have to worry about, Steve Sarkisian and the coach, as far as them not being locked in, fully focused. And if they're not going to be that come Friday night, then Ohio State's going to blow their doors off. So that's another thing about Texas that you have to really comprehend here and wonder whether or not that they're going to be laser focused to play a full 60 minutes against a team that right now is championing them, I guess you could say, or making them the champion here of this college football season. So now to break it down, and I'll start with the game tonight, Penn State and Notre Dame. To me, what it boils down to is the line of scrimmage. Whomever's going to dominate that aspect of the game is probably going to win, because both of these teams have two very good running games. And if you're Notre Dame, you're going to want to definitely dominate Penn State, similar to vice versa, because Notre Dame has a very stout, although no Rylan Mills, who's out, as we know, the defensive lineman there for the Fighting Irish. But whomever's going to take control and win the game in the trenches, that is going to be the winner, because with Riley Leonard, the quarterback of Notre Dame, and with Drew Aller, the Penn State quarterback, we understand that these aren't guys that are going to be drafted near the top of the draft come this April or beyond. These are guys that, yes, they can make plays and they could do enough, but these aren't standout quarterbacks that are going to light up the stat sheet with 30 for 38, 360 yards, 4 touchdowns. These are not the type of guys. Aller's a little bit better than Leonard. Leonard's more of a running quarterback, but this is where the line of scrimmage comes in, because if you control the running game for both sides, you may have a low-scoring game, and I think the game may be a low-scoring one when it's all said and done. But how I look at it is, for Penn State, I think their defense is just as good as Notre Dame's, and this, to me, is a coin flip. This isn't an automatic where, I think Penn State's going to run away with it, or I think Notre Dame's going to pull away late. This could come down to who has the ball last, but more so to set themselves up in field goal range as opposed to a team that's down by a touchdown to march down the field. That's how I look at it. And I think Notre Dame, Penn State, I trust Notre Dame more than Penn State, because Notre Dame, I get it, the bad loss to Northern Illinois earlier this year, but I think they're a little bit more battle-tested. And I get it, the Penn State fan could be like, Jay Reels, how dare you? You just mentioned the games, the Big Ten championship, and what they've done here so far in this playoff. But beating Boise was, Notre Dame beat Georgia. That accounts for something. So therefore, I give Notre Dame just a slight edge. And I'm picking Notre Dame to win 23-17. Think about it, people. Notre Dame has been in these big games tried and true. Have they been successful? Have they won a national championship? They have not. And they haven't been to a national championship since the days of Manti Te'o, when they got run over by Eddie Lacy in the Orange Bowl there in 2012. So for Notre Dame, I'm sure they could sniff it just as much as Penn State can. But I trust Notre Dame more than I trust Penn State. And that's what it boils down to. And as far as Ohio State and Texas, now, to me, what it's going to really be just seen for the whole country is Ohio State and how Texas is going to be able to slow them down, especially right out of the gate. Because if it's going to be 14-0 first quarter, and Quinn Ewers, I understand he's a capable quarterback and a good quarterback, but is he a guy that's going to rally the troops and bring a team back from a big deficit, whether it be early first quarter or even into the second quarter, or dare I even say they're down 28-10, started the third quarter, and they get the ball? Do I have trust in Quinn Ewers to resurrect this team and to get them within one score sometime in the fourth quarter? I can't say I do. And Ohio State, they are on fire. You wonder whether or not Ohio State, maybe reading the press clippings a little bit too much, that could be an issue. And I'm sure Ryan Day's tempering that to the best of his ability, saying that, hey guys, we haven't won anything yet. I know everybody thinks that now we're the team to beat, and so on and so forth. I would hope that Ryan Day, that's the message that he's sending across to his players in that locker room here over the last, whatever it is, 9-10 days. So, and they have an extra day to mull on it, because obviously they're not going to play until tomorrow night. But I see Ohio State playing from in front. Texas, they're too inconsistent for my liking. Can they win the game? Their defense is good. And if they get some turnovers, maybe, who knows? They could be in the fourth quarter of this game. But Ohio State, I think, is their year. And it'll be interesting to see Ohio State and Notre Dame when it's all said and done. I think that would be the more marquee matchup. Ohio State-Penn State, we've seen that game before. And we saw what Ohio State did to Penn State. Now, mind you, it was close early and they pulled away late, but there was no contest, if you ask me, that for Will Howard and company, that they would go up against Penn State in that defense again, and I think they'll beat them in a championship game. To me, out of the games that are left, I think Ohio State, Notre Dame, that would be what ESPN would want in a heartbeat. Notre Dame, Texas, all right. You still have the Longhorns, and you still have certainly a good matchup. But I would think the powers that be would certainly want Notre Dame and Ohio State. Penn State, Texas, I don't think they want any part of that. I'm sure it would be a good game. Would it be a classic game? I don't know. But I think Ohio State will prevail when it's all said and done. I'm picking them to win 31-21 over Texas. And that is your football to start us off here. I know more than 45 minutes in. So I still have a lot to get to. I'm going to try to keep this in a tidy 20 minutes, going to bleed over an hour, but that's what happens when you got a lot cooking in the world of sports. So let's get right to it as I lace up the high tops and go to the association. And I know I haven't talked college basketball either, which we'll get to more toward the end of the month. I know Tennessee got blown out by Florida. They were the last undefeated team in the country, the Volunteers that is, and they got blown out by the Gators. So college basketball will certainly bring that up a lot, especially once we get into February, maybe toward the end of the month. I know Georgetown got off to a great start, 13-2. They lost to Marquette the other day, who's ranked 7th in the country. And, of course, they haven't played anybody, my Hoyas. So we'll get to more of that. End of the month, certainly into next month. But for right now, NBA. And the big question after last night's game, where the Cavaliers beat the Thunder 129-122. And for a subpar performance by Donovan Mitchell, 3 for 16 from the floor. But the bigs, whether your name is Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, certainly contributed big time there with a ton of boards, ton of points. And for them to beat the Oklahoma City Thunder, who came into the game on a 15-game winning streak, to be able to beat them and to extend their own winning streak to 11 games on top of the 15-game winning streak that they had at the start of the year, do we have to really consider the Cavaliers as, dare I say, NBA title contenders? Now, after 36 games with a record of 32-4, and I think they're on pace to match the 2016 Golden State Warriors, which they're not going to do. I'm sorry, they are not going to match that record by any stretch. And granted that the 4 losses that they've had this year, the first one against the Celtics that snapped that 15-game winning streak to start, I don't know how they lost back-to-back games to the Atlanta Hawks there in between Thanksgiving. Oh, they had the Wednesday-Thursday sandwiched in between Thanksgiving, where they lost the 2 games to the Hawks, and then they lost to Miami Heat in Miami later on. But this team, I understand Kenny Atkinson's a very good coach, and for Mitchell, Darius Garland, their backcourt is stupendous. Their front court, very underrated, but very good as well. And they have some guys that come off the bench, in particular, Karis LeVert, very good bench player and a very underrated player, I might add. But I am not sold on the Cavaliers just yet. I'm sorry. They could go 73-9 and match the Golden State Warriors, and I still wouldn't put 100% trust in them to get out of the conference finals and win an NBA title, because that's what it's all about here, people. It's not about them getting to a finals. It's about them winning the whole thing. Because when you're 32-4 and you're approaching the middle of January with that type of record, the talk is not about you getting to a conference final and playing a competitive 7-game series against the Celtics and losing in a 7th game, which right now it would be in their building. So it's all about them winning the thing. And how I look at it is, as a ranked second, I'm not ready to buy that just yet. And I need to see more. And I need to see more so in April, May, and June. And it's going to not happen until you get to the divisional round. Because let's just say, for argument's sake, if the season ends today, they're going to beat whomever the 8th seed is going to be. And obviously we won't know that because they have the 7 through 10. But they're going to beat the 8th seed. Now, if they were to play the 4-5 right now, I think the Bucks would be involved. Let me pull that up real quick. Because the Celtics would have to face the Knicks in the 2-3 matchup as of right this very moment. But the 4-5 is Orlando-Milwaukee. Now, they played Orlando, as we saw last year in the first round. They beat them in 7 games. But they could face a Buck team, which they've handled the Bucks this year. But Who knows? And then you have the conference final, etc. I need to see a lot more in order for me to really, truly, 100% think and believe that the Cavaliers are championship bound and ready to win an NBA crown. I'm sorry. There's nothing else more to add to that. And if you want to get at me all you want, please do, but I need to see more. Now you had Zion Williamson return the other night, 22 points in 28 minutes and a loss, I might add. But for Zion, can the man stay healthy? I would think his hamstring is like 150% as of right this very moment, because even at 100% you can't trust. You almost have to go above that in order for you to believe that Zion is fully healthy in order for him to sustain the rest of this regular season. And mind you, last year he played, 70 games, and he got hurt in that in the tournament where they lost to the Lakers, and then obviously was not to be heard from until early this year, and then he got hurt, and then now here he is now back on the Pelicans. But Zion, if they're going to have any success, and granted that their record is one of the worst in the sport, let's just hope he stays healthy. Let's hope that they maybe get on a roll and can be part of the discussion from the 7 through 10 range. But right now, Zion, one more time. And it's not as if he's not trying to stay healthy, but can we see some consistency with his health and play some games, get reps, and maybe get the Pelicans back to some sort of respectability to where they're a couple of games back from the 10th seed in the Western Conference to maybe they could squeeze in? And I get it. You don't want them taking out the likes of, let's say, the Spurs, who are currently 10th in the conference. Get the Warriors out. I could care less. I understand losing Steph Curry is huge. T-Wolves, Clippers, but right now, the Pelicans are in last place in the Western Conference with a 7-31 record, which is not the worst in the sport. That belongs to the Wizards. But can Zion get some consistency here and stay in the lineup, please? More injuries. You had Kyrie out with a back 1 to 2 weeks, and with no Luka out with a calf muscle, even though they beat the Lakers there a couple nights ago, he won't be reevaluated to the end of January, and that's Luka. But for Kyrie, 1 to 2 weeks with a back, and we know backs are cranky. And Kyrie is not 25, 26 anymore. Kyrie, I believe, is going to be this year? 31, 32 years of age? We know about the knee issues, not that that's an issue right now. But for a back that could be lingering, keep that in mind as you get deeper into the season. And you are going to get a guy that's coming back in Paolo Banchero. He may return tonight or tomorrow. Tonight, I believe they play Minnesota, tomorrow against Milwaukee. So that's going to be a welcome with open arms for a Magic team that has lost both Wagners, the brothers there, Franz and Moritz. Moritz done for the year, and Franz out also with an oblique injury. But Banchero, who arguably is the best player on the team, and with the Magic playing well, 4 seed in the conference, and a few games back of the Knicks there for a 3 seed, I'm sure that once he gets his game shape and basketball shape together, you would think that Banchero and company, they're going to be primed to see if they can inch closer to the top of the Eastern Conference, although not anywhere close to the Cavs, but maybe try to catch the Celtics despite the fact that they're 6 games in a loss behind Boston for a 2 seed. And other than that in the sport, what do you have? Sacramento's playing well now. After jettisoning Mike Brown, Doug Christie has their team winning 5 in a row, as they're on the outside looking in, although tied with the same record for the Spurs, but the Spurs had the advantage there, and they currently hold the 10th seed, half game behind the Warriors, who are 18-18, I might add. But other than that, you don't really have much going on. Pacers have won 4 in a row, so they've done pretty well. Pistons have won 5 in a row. We talked about the Pistons there on Monday, how they've turned their season around. I understand Jaden Ivey, I always say Ivory. Jaden Ivey, who is going to be out with a fractured tibia. But the NBA, let's look at the schedule here this upcoming week. And the one thing about the schedule I do know, because I wanted to see who was going to play not only this weekend, but when the next time Cleveland and Oklahoma City are going to reacquaint themselves. I can't speak today. I don't know. Maybe it's the cold that's got my tongue a little frostbite here. But you're going to have Oklahoma City play the Knicks tomorrow night at the Garden before going to Washington and then Philadelphia. So they're going to be part of the Northeastern Corridor, sans Boston. So tomorrow night at the Garden against the Knicks, Sunday night against the Wizards, and then Monday in Philadelphia, or Tuesday in Philadelphia, to play the Sixers before going home a week from tonight to play the Cavaliers. So they're going to host the Cavs next week. So you'll have a quick rematch of the game last night, this time in OKC. So I just thought to mention that to you guys and gals. Although that's for a game that's next Thursday. But you're scheduled for the weekend. Minnesota and Orlando, let's see if Banchero plays. Houston at Memphis, 2-3 seeds in the Western Conference. Good matchup there. Atlanta at Phoenix. Then tomorrow, Golden State, Indiana. I guess Golden State's going to come east here. Milwaukee to Orlando, we talked about. Pelican Sixers at Sacramento at Boston as the Kings. We talked about their winning streak. Then you have, going into the weekend, Houston at Atlanta. Memphis and Minnesota. Spurs at LA to play the Lakers. And then Sunday, Bucks and Knicks. Denver, Dallas. I know Jokic didn't play the other night against the Celtics, who was out with an illness. I would think he'd be back by then. Pelicans in Boston. Philly, Orlando. That's what you have there in the NBA as far as your schedule forthcoming. To the NHL, not much going on here, even when you get to the standings. Although you do have an interesting storyline that I want to get to, but we'll talk about the storyline. I will talk about the standings in a moment. So the NHL has announced that they're going to have 2 outdoor games next year. Now, it's interesting because I don't know about the Winter Classic game, if that's going to be on New Year's Eve, but there is going to be a game on January 2nd between the Rangers and Panthers. So before you think, oh, wow, where are they going to play that game? Is that going to be at MetLife again? Oh, what about Yankee Stadium? I think, come on, they got to bring it back to Yankee Stadium like they did many years ago when they played the Devils. Oh, wait a minute. I remember, 2015-16 when the Buffalo Sabres came to Citi Field and you had Sabres and Rangers there? No, not in those stadiums. You're going to have Rangers, Panthers, January 2nd next year in Marlins Park, or as currently known as loanDepot Park. It is going to be played in Miami. As the NHL's announced 2 games, the other one being February 1st, where the Bruins will go to Tampa to play the Lightning in Raymond James Stadium, of course, home of the Buccaneers. And I understand you're not going to have chilly, frosty thoughts when those games are going to be played, despite the fact that it was 50 degrees this morning in Miami. I checked, considering how cold it was here. I was wondering, what is it like in other parts of the country? Miami's 50 degrees, and I believe the high is going to be in the 60s. And the wind chill in Miami, believe it or not, was 41 degrees. So unless they get a game like that, now it helps that they have the dome, because of course it is enclosed. It's retractable. And for the NHL and even for the Panthers, it does bode well for them to have the building indoors, because remember, last year the game was in Seattle between Vegas and the Golden Knights, where they had it in the Mariners' home park at T-Mobile Park. So at least they can have it controlled to keep the ice and the, not the arena, I guess you could say, but the stadium cool and not have any issues when it comes to having patches of ice melting. Now, who knows? Maybe they'll get lucky and they'll have a 60-degree day in South Florida. But with the dome, it's not going to have that feel of outdoors and chilly weather and things of that nature. But you wonder, in Tampa, where it is a little bit colder and it is off the water, where it being outdoors, and if you have a day, let's even look at the temperature there. I don't want this to interfere with the microphone, but just to show you that I've been doing a little bit of my homework, people. But if you're going to have a situation where the game in Tampa, now mind you, anything can happen. You could probably have an 80-degree day in Tampa at that time. But for them to play that game in February, Tampa right now, you know what? It could bode well. Not that I have a crystal ball for a forecast more than 365 days ahead of me. But Tampa today, as of right this second, it is 49 degrees. And you know what? I'm sure the NHL, they would write that in blood. I'm sure Gary Bettman will take a vial or two of blood out of his own system to sign up for that. The temperature this time of year in Tampa, or in that area, is in the upper 60s, low 70s, which of course they're going to have to take. But if they do have a seasonably warm day, that can cause issues for the ice. But you're going to have 2 games in Florida. I get it. The NHL has not had an outdoor game. LA, they've had that, where the Anaheim Ducks played LA at Dodger Stadium that one time. And I talked about several other games that they've had here in warm weather regions. And now you're going to have a scenario where you're going to have these games being played down in Florida, which in one stadium, not much of a dice roll because, like I mentioned, you do have a retractable dome. It would be nice for them to start the game maybe with the dome closed and then maybe get to the third period, then open it. And maybe in the last 5 minutes of the game, you have at least a little bit of the elements coming in with the sun. Now, if it's going to rain, different story. But as you all know, it doesn't really rain that much in South Florida, not to the tune of the summertime that it does in that part of the season. But let's see. Still more than a year to go, but you're going to have 2 outdoor games in Florida next year. I know it sounds bizarre and it sounds un-hockey-like because you think of ice, you think of frozen tundra, you think of cold weather, you think of frozen pond in the backyard, that type of deal, or a frozen pond in your neighborhood. Not the case when you're going to have palm trees littered for those games in January, February next year. And then I know Evgeny Malkin had a streak of 209 games snapped with an upper body injury, for what that's worth. And with the sport itself, Maple Leafs have played well. A little bit of breathing room between them and the Panthers. Bruins have lost 5 in a row. They have not played well here in the Atlantic. Capitals, Ovechkin hasn't scored since the weekend, so we'll keep him in mind, as you know. 5 points ahead of the Devils in the Metropolitan. Out west, Minnesota, Dallas playing well. Winners of 4 and 5 game streaks in their own right. Wild 2 points behind the Jets as of right this moment. Stars 5 points behind the Wild. Dallas beat the Rangers at the Garden the other night. They play Philadelphia tonight. I'll go through the schedule in a second. And then Vegas, who have won 3 in a row on the heels of Houston. I see the Oilers. I'm thinking Houston Oilers. Edmonton and the LA Kings winning 4 in a row. 6 and 8 points respectively behind the Golden Knights, who have 59 points at the top of the Pacific Division. And with that being said, they have the most points in the sport as of right this moment. So that's what you have in the NHL. Nothing else to really sink your teeth into. Let's take a look at what games we have forthcoming. I know Edmonton's at Pittsburgh tonight. Edmonton beat Boston the other night, shut them out, the Bruins, in the TD Bank Garden. Tonight, Boston at Tampa. Oh, there you go. There's your matchup February 1st next year. But, of course, they're going to play tonight down at the Amalie Arena. Or Amway. No, it's Amalie or whatever the arena is. Devils, Rangers, Dallas, Philadelphia, Edmonton at Pittsburgh, Colorado, Minnesota. Islanders are in Vegas tonight. Tomorrow, an original 6, Chicago, Detroit, Montreal at Washington, again for Ovechkin. Kings at Winnipeg, good game there. Saturday, Boston at Florida is your 1 o'clock game. That's being played indoors in their arena there. So the Panthers get their nationally televised game Saturday afternoon. Tampa, New Jersey, Edmonton, Chicago, Colorado, Winnipeg. So Colorado with a couple of big games there. Minnesota and going to Winnipeg. Games in their own division. Washington, Nashville. Islanders take their first trip to Utah. Rangers are in Vegas. And then Sunday, Tampa at Pittsburgh. That's all you got there. Minnesota at Vegas. Sunday. That rounds out your NHL. As far as I'm pulling up this story here, I know I didn't talk about this, so I got to make a mention of this. So my apologies to the folks out in LA who are going through just a terrible tragedy with the wildfires just raging out of control. I know you had the game last night with Calgary and the LA Kings postponed because of it. I know there's been talk about maybe the game Monday night between the Rams and Cardinals moved to Arizona. Still have some time and some days to think about it, but I would think the game will probably be played, and we would only hope so. I know the Lakers are on the road, so you don't have to worry about the Lakers being played, unless they have a game there tomorrow night. I know I talked about the Lakers there as I pull up their schedule. I think they're on the road. Lakers schedule tomorrow night. They're hosting a game. And the Clippers they're hosting Saturday night. So who knows what's going to happen there. Maybe the Lakers host tonight, in fact. Lakers host the Hornets, so I don't know if they're going to be able to play that game. That we'll have to wait and see. So again, just thoughts, prayers, everything going out to the people there at LA. And I'm also looking at here a story, Frank Wycheck, if you recall, who had passed away, what was it, a little over a year ago, December 9th, the tight end who played for the Titans there in Tennessee, does show that the late star was diagnosed with CTE. Of course, that's the degenerative brain disease that is linked to all the concussions, all the blows that he took throughout the course of his career. So that just came down the news cycle here just a few minutes ago. But for baseball, nothing really to get into. I know you had a couple of transactions here. Justin Verlander signs, as I get into the batter's box, Justin Verlander signs a one-year, $15 million deal with the Giants to see what left is in his 42-year-old arm. Gavin Lux got traded from the Dodgers to the Reds, and this is in the light of the Dodgers signing the Korean infielder Hae-Sung Kim. So that made Gavin Lux expendable, So for Lux to now get traded after a World Series win, now to go to Cincinnati to see what he could do to try to resurrect that team and to add his bat and his ability to that lineup. You also have the A's, who have done a lot of wheeling and dealing here, more so with Severino and now Brent Rooker, their DH. They signed him to a 5-year, $60 million deal. So kudos to them trying to sign or re-sign their own. And then some sad news with Brian Matusz, the former Baltimore Orioles pitcher. I had O's and A's mixed up, people. How the former number one pick of the Orioles and number one overall, or fourth overall in the number one first round draft, died at the age of 37. Death right now unknown, but for Matusz, who had a lot of promise. I mean, when you're a first round pick and number 4 overall, of course, there's going to be a lot banking on you to produce and be a big-time pitcher. Now, he had his moments, but nothing spectacular based on where he was slotted and where he was drafted. Left-handed pitcher, mostly an Oriole, but then bounced around there in his final year. I believe it was in 2016, was with the Dodgers, and I believe ended his career with the Cubs or with the Braves. Bounced around there a little bit before saying sayonara to the game, but just a terrible story from Brian Matusz, the former Oriole pitcher. Thoughts, prayers, condolences go out to the Matusz family, the Orioles, and Major League Baseball, etc. Very sad to read that. And then finally, for the tennis fan out there, as it becomes part of our consciousness again, the first leg of the Grand Slam, first of 4, down under in Australia. And the reason why I bring it up now, because the tournament will actually start Sunday. Usually these tournaments start Monday, and I would have talked about it more then, but because it's starting Sunday local time, and in essence starting Saturday here in the States, you're going to have the first one where Aryna Sabalenka and Jannik Sinner are your defending champ heading into this tournament. And to break it down, how I look at it here, Sinner, who's had a big year, and Sinner is a guy that looks to defend his title, and he beat Daniil Medvedev last year. Remember, both Djokovic and Carlos Alcaraz, his stiffest competition, were both out of the tournament by the time he got to the final. Here, what I'm going to look for when I take a look at these draws, Sinner is opposite of not only Djokovic and Alcaraz, but also Zverev. And it's quite possible that you may have a Djokovic-Alcaraz quarterfinal, not a semifinal or a final for that matter. And if you do get that quarterfinal between Joker and Alcaraz, the likelihood of them facing off against Alexander Zverev is very highly likely. So a very competitive draw on that side, where Sinner has Medvedev on his side. And yes, we could talk about the Taylor Fritzes and players like that, but Fritz, they have not been able to get to that level of those aforementioned guys. And we could talk about the Andrei Rublevs and the Holger Runes and the Casper Ruuds and guys that have been very good players. But when we talk about the top flight guys and the ones that we may see at the very end, the side that Sinner's on is a cakewalk in comparison to what Zverev, as a 2 seed, will have Alcaraz and Djokovic standing in their way. So just keep that in mind when you get to this tournament. And how I look at it is, I know Djokovic is now 37 years of age, will be 38. He's won this tournament 10 times. Does he have enough to go back and win it? That is one storyline from the men's side. The other one, I think, is Carlos Alcaraz, because he already has 4 major Grand Slam wins under his belt, but not an Australian. We've seen him win 2 Wimbledons. He's won a U.S. Open, and he's also won a French. The French he did last year as well as Wimbledon, but he has not won an Open down in Australia. So, to me, that's another storyline that you have there with the 20-year-old Spaniard. And other than that, on the men's side, I don't know, is Zverev or the aforementioned Rune and Taylor Fritz, do they have what it takes to try to get themselves to not only a semifinal, but even a final? We get it. The point is to win the whole thing. But I'm going to root for Alcaraz. I know I have a bit of an allegiance toward him. Nothing against Sinner or Djokovic, and I respect Djokovic to the high heavens. But I'm going to pick Alcaraz to win this only because, and I know a tougher draw, he's got to get through Djokovic, he's got to get through Sinner, he's got to get through Zverev, and maybe even Sinner when it's all said and done. But when you're 20 years old and a lot of time off, and this is the one thing you got to worry about with Alcaraz. He's had these moments where his health has failed him. And mind you, since the U.S. Open was last August, and you wonder what his health is. I'm sure he's coming in impeccable shape, and he's probably raring to go, etc. But with the heat down there, because remember, it's their summertime now, and is that going to be a thing where mentally and the war of attrition against the elements, against the heat and humidity and maybe dehydration, is that going to slow him down? Is that going to be a thing that we're going to have to watch out for, where maybe a cramp or some sort of injury may crop up and slow him to get to that final and win the whole thing? That is going to be one thing that I'm going to pay attention to. But you know what? I'm going to say, I'm going to throw that aside. I would think that he knows in the back of his mind that he has not won his tournament yet. He's not even 21. I get that. And for him to know that he's going to have plenty of Australian Opens ahead of him, I would think he's going to want to get this. So maybe his hunger and his determination is going to supersede maybe his health on this stage. So I'm going to pick him to win the whole thing on the men's side. And then on the women's side, Sabalenka is going in hot. She not only won a U.S. Open, but she's won back-to-back Australian Opens. Can she win 3 in a row? Now, we've seen these players go on a run. In particular, someone like Iga Swiatek, who has won 4 of the last 5 French Opens and 3 in a row. Now, can she win 3 in a row, Sabalenka? I know it's going to be tough to not go against her considering her success on this court. But with her, and obviously with Swiatek, who has a lot to prove if you ask me, because outside of the 1 U.S. Open that she won in the 4 French Opens, she has not done well on grass or down under. So let's see if Swiatek could rise to the level of Sabalenka here on this course and in this tournament. And then you have the Coco Gauffs of the world. And her side of the draw is interesting because as Swiatek and for Coco Gauff, Naomi Osaka, Jessica Pegula, that is on Sabalenka's side. So unlike the men's side where it's going to be difficult to get to Sinner as the number 1 seed, Sabalenka has a lot of heavyweights in her bracket with the aforementioned Gauff, with as well as Jessica Pegula on top of Naomi Osaka. And Osaka, I understand she's still trying to get her sea legs under her because she has not had a lot of length because of the time off that she's had from the sport, not only giving birth to a baby, but also the mental health issues that she has. But for Swiatek, the only really stiff competition on her side of the draw is Aryna Sabalenka. So maybe Swiatek has a much of a clearer path to get to a final and win it. And I think she'll get there when it's all said and done. But I'm going to pick Sabalenka. I'd like to see history. Let her win 3 in a row. And to match the French Open 3 in a row that Swiatek has done over the last 3 years. And I love the tennis just like I love the golf when we get to the major tournaments. Now that it's here, something else to add to the sports calendar and something to add to the podcast here over the next couple of weeks. So I think Sabalenka and Alcaraz were going to be your winners. That's my prediction here. But tough draw for Sabalenka's side. Could she lose? Absolutely. Anybody can lose. And Goff, let's see if she could bounce back from the last couple of tournaments. She hasn't won in quite some time when she won the U.S. Open, I believe, in 2023. So now let's see if she could get her game back, although on a tough side of the draw. But we will certainly take a look as the Australian Open commences Sunday down in Melbourne. That'll do it, my good people. I know it's a little bit long here, but that's all right. When you got a lot of sports cooking and a lot to discuss, this is what's going to happen. You're going to have a podcast that's going to be chock full of nuggets provided by yours truly to you guys and gals out there. And I thank you so much for carving precious time out of your day to listen to what it is that I have to say about what goes on in the wonderful world of sports. As always, if you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, review. Throw me a few stars, write a review. Apple, Spotify, jreels.com is the website. Of course, the YouTube channel at jreels. Please subscribe, like, leave a comment on that platform. I would sincerely appreciate it. And I surpassed 500 subscribers, so I'm more than halfway to 1,000. So please share with your family, friends, foes, frenemies. Take screenshots on social, share it with me. I'll share it with the world. It will go a long way to extending and just showing the visibility of this podcast to all the others that are out there. And for those people out there wondering, those socials are the following: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the J Reels Podcast, Twitter, JReels1, just the number. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, or suggestion, the old-fashioned way, you can do it at the JReels Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, it's what I love to do, people. It's why I quit my job 11 months ago to do this, pursue it full time. And I'm still trying to generate income in the process. So your participation is vital to this journey of mine. And I'm so happy that you're on board. And like I said, spread the wealth with all those who may be interested. And even on the channel, YouTube, where I put up some lifestyle content, I got something just about done editing, which I am hoping to put up by Saturday at the earliest, but by sure Sunday the latest. So please, people, this is one that I truly love. Sports in the blood and the DNA. What it is that I do is nothing but filled in front of this mic and camera with passion, fire, energy, fury, with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the J Reels Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the J Reels Podcast, on the flip, baby.